Diplomatic blunders had left our peace. Treaty hanging by a fraying thread. Suddenly, a sovereign who ruled a billion stars picked up a simple ceramic mug. He drank, his compound eyes dilated, and he violently collapsed. Humanity didn't assassinate an alien god with advanced lasers. We did it with a dark roast. Wyatt Mercer was not a diplomat. He was a glorified babysitter. In a cheap suit, his official title was Sector Logistics Coordinator for the Terran delegation, which was a very polite way of saying he was the guy who made sure the air conditioning didn't freeze the reptilian delegates and that the lighting didn't blind the Avan ones. For 3 weeks, humanity had been locked in excruciating negotiations with the Viskar Ascendancy. The Viskar were an apex species, 8 FT of kitten muscle and calculated supremacy. They didn't negotiate, they dictated terms, and humanity, desperately outgunned and financially bleeding, was trying to smile while swallowing gravel. Wyatt's head throbbed, a sharp rhythmic pulsing sat just behind his left eye, keeping perfect time with the low-frequency hum of the station's life support generators. He rubbed his face. His skin felt greasy, his jaw rough with 2 days of neglected stubble. The air in Sector 4's auxiliary prep room was stale, tasting faintly of ozone and recycled sweat. He needed a hit, not the synthetic stem tabs the military handed out like candy. Those made your teeth grind and your heart flutter like a trapped bird. Wyatt needed the dirt. He needed the ritual. He checked the heavy blast door, ensuring the biometric lock glowed steady, reassuring red, secure. He pulled a battered, dented thermos from his satchel, unscrewing the cup. Inside was a marvel of archaic engineering, a portable battery-operated French press. He poured the hot water from a thermal flask over the coarse grounds. The smell hit the sterile air like a sledgehammer. Rich, earthy, bitter, it smelled like mud, burnt wood, and survival. Wyatt closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. For 3 seconds, he wasn't on a floating 10,50 light years from Earth, watching his species beg for survival. He was back in a rainy Seattle apartment, listening to the traffic. He plunged the filter down. The resistance of the wet grounds felt good, real. He poured the pitch-black liquid into a white ceramic mug, a cheap chipped thing he'd stolen from the break room back at command. He brought the mug to his lips. The heat radiated against his nose. Snorts. The red light on the door turned green. Wyatt froze. The heavy pneumatic hiss of the door sliding open sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He didn't turn around immediately. He couldn't. His brain was furiously cycling through. Who had the clearance to override a manual lockdown? Only the chief ambassador or station security. Foulness. A voice vibrated. It wasn't a voice, not really. It was a resonance that rattled the fillings in Wyatt's teeth. A deep clicking hum translated by the dampener implant at the base of Wyatt's skull into English. Wyatt turned slowly. The coffee sloshed over the rim of the mug, scalding his thumb. He barely felt it. Standing in the doorway was High Sovereign Veilkarn, the king of the Viskar Ascendancy. He had to duck to enter the room. Valkar was a monument of dark, iridescent armor. His exoskeleton shimmered with hues of bruised purple and oil-slick black under the harsh fluorescent lights. Snorts. 4 upper limbs ended in articulated digits that could crush steel, resting casually against his broad thorax. His snort's head was angular, crowned with sensory crests that twitched independently. He smelled of petrior, copper, and something sharp like sulfur. There were no guards, no retinue. The sovereign had simply wandered off. Wyatt's stomach plummeted into his shoes. His mouth went bone dry. The protocol manual flashed in his mind. Massive 1,000-page document he had skimmed. Do not make direct eye contact. Do not stand above them. Do not initiate conversation. Wyatt was holding a chipped mug of illegal, unregulated biological matter. High Sovereign, Wyatt choked out, his voice cracking. He bowed his head, staring at the scuffed toe of his own polished shoe. I apologize. This room was designated private. Valkar stepped fully into the room. The deck plates groaned under his immense weight. Click-clack, the heavy, measured steps brought him agonizingly close. The smell of copper intensified, thick and suffocating. You consume a toxin. The Sovereign resonated. The translation implant made it sound like a judgment. Valk was looking down at the mug, his mandibles tucked neatly behind. A plated jaw clicked softly. The Viscar experienced the world largely through chemoreception. They tasted the air. They smelled intent. It's just a beverage, Sovereign, Wyatt said, his hands trembling slightly. A human custom, a hot drink. Valkarn leaned closer. The heat radiating off the alien's carapace was immense, like standing next to an open oven. His sensory crests flattened, drawing in the heavy, bitter aroma of the dark roast. The molecular density is aggressive. It burns the air, Valk observed. One massive clawed hand reached out. You ingest this for sustenance? No, Wyatt said, his voice barely a whisper. For energy. It wakes us up. It helps us focus. Valkar's head tilted, the alien equivalent of a raised eyebrow. A civilization built on biological mastery, on genetically engineering themselves into perfection. And here was a fragile pink-skinned primate boiling dead plants to stay awake. Fascinating, the Sovereign murmured. Your species relies on raw environment. Chemistry, crude, violent. The massive hand stopped inches from the mug. I will experience this violence. Wyatt's heart stopped. The blood drained from his face, leaving him cold. Sovereign, I don't think that's wise. Our biologies are entirely incompatible. The Terran medical attaché hasn't cleared cross-species consumption. This is unregulated. Valk's posture stiffened. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to drop. The clicking of his mandibles ceased. Human denies the ascendancy. The translator didn't need to convey the threat, the sheer physical presence of the alien did it perfectly. To refuse the Sovereign was a slight of monumental proportions. Wars had been started over less. Entire planetary populations had been decimated because an ambassador failed to lower their gaze. Wyatt swallowed hard. His throat clicked. Damned if he did, dead if he didn't. With shaking hands, he extended the chipped white mug upward. Valkarn took it. The ceramic cup looked absurdly tiny in the alien's massive armored grasp. Wyatt backed away, his shoulders hitting the cold steel of the prep counter. He watched helpless, entirely stripped of agency. The Visser Sovereign brought the mug to his face. The segmented plates of his lower jaw parted, revealing a complex array of feeding palps and a dark muscular throat. He didn't sip, he didn't test the temperature. He tipped the mug back and drained the boiling black sludge in one fluid motion. For 2 seconds, absolutely nothing happened. Wyatt let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, he thought. Irrationally. Maybe they just have iron stomachs. Maybe it's just hot water to him. Then the mug shattered, it slipped from Valkarn's grip, exploding into white shards against the metal deck. The dark liquid splattered across Wyatt's shoes. Valkarn emitted a sound Wyatt had never heard and hoped to never hear again. It was a high-pitched mechanical shriek, like metal tearing under immense pressure. The dampener in Wyatt's skull shorted out with a sharp pop of static, unable to translate the sheer auditory violence of the noise. The Sovereign took a staggered step backward, his 4 upper limbs extended outward, rigid, hands clenching into tight, vibrating fists. Sovereign Wyatt screamed, abandoning protocol, abandoning common sense. He lunged forward, Vile's head snapped toward him. The alien's compound eyes, usually a calm, deep obsidian, were rapidly shifting color, bleeding into a terrifying luminous crimson. His mandibles were foaming, a thick, milky secretion bubbling rapidly from his mouth. He was choking, he was dying. Help, we need a medic, help. Wyatt bellowed at the ceiling, hoping the station's passive audio monitors would pick it up. Valkarn stumbled, his immense bulk crashing into the reinforced steel table. In the center of the room, the table buckled, groaning under the impact. The Sovereign's legs, thick as tree trunks, began to tremble violently. A violent seizure racked the massive alien frame. His armor plates ground against each other with the sound of a rock crusher. Caffeine, the thought hit Wyatt with the force of a physical blow. It was a natural pesticide, evolved on Earth to paralyze and kill insects. The Viscar weren't insects, not really. But their nervous systems were wildly different from mammals. What gave a human a mild jolt of alertness was flooding the alien god system with an unfiltered catastrophic neurotoxin. Valkarn collapsed. He hit the floor so hard the vibration traveled up Wyatt's legs and rattled his spine. The Sovereign writhed for a fraction of a second, his limbs curling inward in a fetal defensive posture. Then, with a final wet gasp, he went completely, terrifyingly still. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. Wyatt stood frozen. He looked at the shattered mug. He looked at the giant, motionless body of the most powerful being in the known galaxy. The faint smell of roasted coffee hung pleasantly in the air, masking the bitter scent of alien foam. "Oh God," Wyatt whimpered. He covered his mouth with both hands. Bile rose in his throat, burning acidic and hot. Oh God, oh God, oh God. He had killed him. He had literally assassinated the king of the Ascendancy. Humanity was extinct. It was over. The Viscar fleet would glass Earth before the week was out, and it was all because Wyatt Mercer couldn't skip his morning brew. The blast door didn't slide open. Time it blew inward, the sheer kinetic force threw Wyatt against the back wall. His head cracked against a shelving unit, stars bursting across his vision. Dust and smoke filled the air. Through the haze, monsters poured into the room. Visser Royale guards, 7 FT of crimson plated fury wielding heavy plasma lances. They moved with terrifying insecto speed. 3 of them surrounded the fallen Sovereign, dropping to their knees, their hands moving in a blur over his motionless body. The other 2 locked onto Wyatt. Wyatt didn't try to fight. He didn't raise his hands to defend himself. He just slid down the wall, his legs giving out completely. A massive armored hand clamped around his throat. The grip was cold, hard, and unforgiving. He was hoisted into the air, his feet kicking uselessly a foot off the ground. The visor guard brought Wyatt close to its face. The alien's breath smelled like ash and old blood. Poisoner, the guard hissed. The word wasn't translated by an implant. It was spoken in broken, jagged English. It was Wyatt gasped, clawing weakly at the immovable fingers, crushing his windpipe. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. His lungs screamed for air. The guard slammed Wyatt face first into the metal deck. Pain exploded in his nose. Blood gushed over his lips, tasting of copper and salt. Snorts. A heavy armored boot pressed between his shoulder blades, pinning him with enough force to crack ribs. Wyatt couldn't breathe. He could only lay there, his cheek pressed against a shard of the broken ceramic mug, listening to the frantic alien clicks and shrieks of the medics trying to revive a dead king. I just wanted a cup of coffee, Wyatt thought, the sheer absurdity of it cutting through the terror. I just wanted a goddamn cup of coffee. Then the darkness swallowed him. The cold woke him. It wasn't just a physical chill, it was a deep, biting temperature that seemed to seep directly into Wyatt's bones. He groaned, shifting his weight. His entire body felt like one massive, throbbing bruise. His face was crusted with dried blood, and his chest screamed in protest with every shallow breath. He opened his eyes. He was in a cell, not a human holding cell with a cot and a toilet, but a Visker containment unit. Sterile, featureless cube composed of brushed dark metal. The lighting was painfully bright, a harsh bluish white that offered no shadows to hide in. He was sitting on the floor. There was no furniture. Wyatt pulled his knees to his chest, wrapping his arms around them to stop the shivering. Panic, which had been smothered by unconsciousness, began to claw its way back up his throat. He remembered the mug, the seizure, the terrifying stillness of the Sovereign. He was going to die here. But first, they were going to extract every piece of information from him, dissecting him nerve by nerve to find out who ordered the assassination. He tried to think of his family back home, his sister in Chicago, his aging mother. He couldn't picture their faces. All he could see were the dilated, crimson eyes of the dying alien. A section of the wall simply dissolved. No hiss, no sliding doors. The solid metal liquefied and pulled back, revealing a Visker. This one was different from the guards or the Sovereign. Its carapace was a pale chalky white, adorned with intricate glowing silver etchings. A scientist, an inquisitor. It stepped into the room. And GT snorts. And GT. It held a small transparent plastile data pad. Wyatt Mercer, the white visor, spoke. The voice in Wyatt's head, his implant apparently functioning again, was devoid of inflection. A flat synthesized drone. Terran Logistics Coordinator, blood type O positive, heart rate currently elevated to 140 beats per minute. You are experiencing acute terror. Wyatt swallowed, tasting old blood. He didn't speak. What was the point? I am KL, the alien continued, standing over him like a pale monolith. Chief medical synthesizer for the Sovereign's retinue. You will explain the chemical weapon you administered to High Sovereign. It wasn't a weapon. Wyatt rasped. His voice sounded like sandpaper on concrete. He forced himself to look up at the towering figure. I swear to God. It was a beverage. Kyle tapped the data pad with a long, articulated claw. A holographic projection sprang to life. Between them, it was a complex rotating molecular structure, hexagons and geometric lines. We have analyzed the residue from the shattered vessel as well as the Ba fluids extracted from the Sovereign's primary stomachs. Kale droned. The substance is a highly concentrated botanical extraction. Its primary active compound is 1,3,7-trimethylxanthine. Wyatt stared blankly at the floating molecule. I don't know what that is. I failed chemistry. Kale's mandibles clicked rapidly in irritation. Do not employ deception, Terran. The compound is an alkaloid. In our biological modeling, it acts as an aggressive, uninhibited antagonist to adenosine receptors. It prevents the brain from recognizing fatigue while simultaneously forcing the adrenal glands to violently expel epinephrine into the bloodstream. The white viscar leaned down, bringing its terrifying face level with Wyatt's. It is a weapon designed to overload the nervous system, Kyle stated, synthesized voice vibrating with an underlying edge of awe and fury. It forces the host organism into a state of terminal hyperarousal, a heart failure induction chemical, and yet our scans of your quarters reveal bulk containers of this organic matter. You keep it in your living spaces. You ingest it. It's coffee, Wyatt said, a hysterical broken laugh escaping his lips. He couldn't stop it. The absurdity was breaking his mind. It's literally just coffee. We drink it in the mornings. It wakes us up so we can do our stupid, meaningless jobs. You consume a paralytic neurotoxin to aid in your labor. Kale's posture shifted. The alien actually took a half step back. Concept seemed to short-circuit its logic. Centers? Yes, Wyatt said, wiping his bloody nose with the back of his sleeve. It barely does anything to us. A mild buzz, maybe the shakes if you drink too much. I didn't know what it would do to him. He demanded it. You have to believe me. I tried to warn him. The Sovereign is in a state of catastrophic biological cascade, Kyle said coldly. His hearts are beating at 3 times their maximum functional capacity. His neural pathways are firing with such intensity that his brain waves are projecting ambient heat. We have induced a chemical coma, but the toxin continues to burn through our suppressants. Wyatt dropped his head into his hands. It was over. When will the execution be? Wyatt asked into his palms, his voice hollow. Just make it fast, please. Kyle did not answer immediately. The alien stood perfectly still, reading the data scrolling across the transparent pad. Execution is dependent on the outcome of the Sovereign's cascade, Kale finally said. Your species' survival is dependent on it. Before Wyatt could process the weight of that statement, the harsh lighting in the cell flickered. It dipped to a dim gray, then surged back to blinding white. A loud, piercing klaxon began to wail through the metal walls of the station. It wasn't the human alarm for fire or breach. It was a viscar resonance horn, a sound of ultimate emergency. Kyle's head snapped up, sensory crests fully flared. The data pad dropped from its claws, clattering against the floor. The medical bay, Kyle hissed, the synthesized translation lagging behind. The The raw panic in the alien's natural. Clicks, the suppressants have failed. Wyatt looked up, his blood running cold. He died, no, Kyle said, turning toward the dissolving wall, the white viscar. Looked back at Wyatt, and for the first time, Wyatt saw something recognizable in the alien's posture. It was pure, unadulterated terror. He has awakened. Wyatt was dragged through the metallic corridors by his collar. Cale's grip was unyielding, crushing the fabric of his cheap suit against his bruised neck. The station had descended into utter, visceral chaos. Red emergency luminescence strobed relentlessly, cutting sharp, jagged shadows across the polished bulkheads. The air tasted metallic and sharp, thick, with the smell of burnt ozone and the pungent, musky odor of panicked viscera. Pheromones, armored guards rushed past them in a disorganized frenzy, their typically flawless coordinated marching completely abandoned. They reached the primary medical bay. The massive, reinforced blast doors had not been blown open with explosives. They had been physically ripped off their hinges and crumpled like wet cardboard. Inside the bay, the destruction was staggering. The room, which usually hummed with pristine sterile quiet, was a ruined battlefield. Heavy diagnostic beds lay overturned. Their legs snapped, pools of glowing bioluminescent medical fluids leaked across the cracked floor plates, mixing with shattered glass and torn wires. The ambient silence had been replaced by a frantic high-frequency buzzing sound that grated against the teeth. It sounded like 10,000 enraged hornets trapped inside a vibrating tin drum. In the dead center of the ruined room was Vile Karn. He was a terrifying blur of iridescent black armor. The Sovereign was pacing, though pacing was a woefully inadequate word for the kinetic violence of his movement. He vibrated across the metal deck plates at a speed that made Wyatt's eyes water. Just trying to track him, he would dart to destroyed console, his four massive hands flying across exposed circuits in a blinding flurry of motion, ripping wires out, rerouting power grids, dismantling machinery, and reassembling it into entirely different geometric configurations in mere second. 42 standard planetary cycles. Veilcorn was clicking, the translation implant buried in Wyatt's skull squealed in a desperate attempt to process the blistering speed of the alien syntax. 42 snorts. Cycles utterly squandered on subsonic biorhythms, the profound inefficiency, the unbearable lethargy of my previous existence. I can currently see the cosmic background radiation decaying. I can calculate the precise orbital decay of this space station down to the 17th decimal point. He abruptly stopped. His massive angular head snapped toward the doorway with unnatural swiftness. Kyle's snorts instantly dropped to one knee, bowing deeply. Wyatt, exhausted and battered, simply sagged against the ruined door frame, trying to drag oxygen into his aching lungs. Sovereign, Kyle managed to say the synthesized translation, trembling with genuine fear. Your cardiovascular rate. You are actively burning through your own cellular structure. My cellular structure is ascending to a higher state of matter, Valkarn roared. He crossed the 50-foot expanse of the ruined medical bay in 2 terrifying strides. The physical rush of displaced air nearly knocked Wyatt off his feet. Valkarn loomed directly over them. His compound eyes were no longer the deep, calm obsidian of a regal leader. They were burning with a blinding, incandescent gold light. He radiated physical heat like an open furnace. He smelled overwhelmingly of roasted dark beans and scorched overheated kitten. The human, the insignificant logistics. Ape. You, Valkarn commanded, pointing a heavy claw digit directly at Wyatt's chest. You hid this, Valkarn spoke. The words rapid fire bleeding into one another. Your fragile species possesses a catalyst of unimaginable cognitive acceleration, snorts, and you deliberately kept it hidden behind mundane trade tariffs and pathetic beryllium mining disputes. Wyatt stared up at the jittering, overcaffeinated god. Valk's lower mandibles were twitching uncontrollably. The sensory crests atop his head were fully extended, vibrating rapidly like struck tuning forks. It is just coffee, Wyatt said. He was profoundly tired. The adrenaline had completely left his human system, leaving behind only the sharp ache of bruised ribs and bone-deep exhaustion. It doesn't ascend us to a higher state of matter, it just makes us vaguely anxious and helps us finish our paperwork on time. Paperwork, Valkarn repeated. He paused to process the word. He immediately spun around and began pacing again, the thick deck plates visibly dented beneath his heavy, rapid footsteps. Clang, clang, clang. You utilize a substance that bends the very perception of linear time merely to file administrative documents. This is either the ultimate insult to the grand design of the universe, or it is the ultimate psychological flex of an apex predator. I have not yet decided which. Sovereign. I beg you, Kale pleaded. The chief medical synthesizer was frantically monitoring a handheld diagnostic scanner. Your internal core temperature is reaching critical mass. You will literally boil alive inside your own carapace. Valkarn completely ignored the medic. He stopped pacing abruptly and stared intensely at a blank metal wall, his hands twitching at his sides. Slowly, he turned back to face Wyatt. Make me another cup. Wyatt blinked. Demand was so absurd, so entirely detached from the grim reality of the situation that a harsh, broken laugh escaped his throat. It hurt his bruised chest. No, Wyatt said flatly. Medical bay plunged into dead silence. The high-frequency buzzing ceased. The visor guard stationed outside the broken doorway froze in terror. Kyle slowly turned to look at Wyatt, horror radiating from every line of the alien's pale frame. Vale stepped closer. The intense heat radiating from his armor was suffocating. You dare deny me the catalyst? I deny you a massive cardiac event, Wyatt said, pushing himself off the door frame. He swayed slightly on his feet, but held his ground. He genuinely didn't care anymore. The overwhelming fear of death was gone, replaced entirely by the deep, cynical exhaustion of a retail worker dealing with an incredibly problematic customer. Look at yourself. You are tweaking. You have the jitters. Your hearts are going to explode in about 3 minutes, and then your loyal guards are going to murder me. So no, I'm not making you another cup. You need water. You need to sit down right now. You need to ride this out. Valkar stared at him in stunned silence. The glowing golden eyes were wide and unblinking. Ride it out, the Sovereign echoed softly. Yeah, Wyatt said, it is called a severe caffeine crash, and it is going to thoroughly suck. Valkarn's lower mandibles clattered together in a frantic, irregular rhythm. He looked Down at his own 4 hands, they were. Shaking violently, the immortal king of the ascendancy, a being who had personally conquered star systems and genetically subjugated entire pantheons of lesser alien species, was experiencing a mundane caffeine-induced hand tremor. He tried to clench his digits into fists to force the shaking to stop, but his highly evolved muscles flatly refused to obey the command. The microscopic biological machines within his complex bloodstream were screaming, utterly flooded and confused by the aggressive chemical signals of a roasted terrestrial plant seed. Valkarn began the translation implant, catching a bizarre, unprecedented tone in the sovereign's usually imperious voice. Uncertainty. Vulnerability. I feel an overwhelming impending sense of cosmic doom. Wyatt nodded slowly. He rubbed his face, smearing the dried blood across his cheekbone. Yeah, I know the feeling. That is the anxiety kicking in. That happens when you severely overdo the dosage, especially on an empty stomach. Did you eat anything substantial today? Before you drank that? Kyle, still kneeling on the floor, stared up at Wyatt as if the human had suddenly sprouted a second head. Absolutely no one asked the sovereign about his dietary schedule. It was an unthinkable breach of royal protocol. I consumed a standard nutrient pay cycle 4 planetary rotations ago. Valkar answered hesitantly, his voice dropping significantly in pitch. The hyperkinetic energy was finally beginning to fray at the edges. Terrifying manic pacing was slowly being replaced by a heavy swaying stance. Right, so you drank a massive, concentrated dose of dark roast on an entirely empty stomach, Wyatt said, sighing deeply. He felt a bizarre, distinctly human sense of empathy welling up for the terrifying alien warlord. It was the universal, unspoken camaraderie of the severely over-caffeinated. You're going to crash incredibly hard. And GT, snorts. And GT, your blood sugar is probably entirely non-existent right now. Kyle, does your species process simple glucose sugars? Kale hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking back and forth from the fragile human to the swaying sovereign. We possess the biological ability to process simple carbohydrates for immediate cellular repair. Yes, get him some, Wyatt ordered. He was no longer the lowly logistics coordinator begging for a scrap of a treaty. He was the only person in the room who actually knew how to handle a bad trip. Find something incredibly sweet and get a lot of purified water. Do it right now. Before he drops, Velcro groaned loudly. The sound was low and miserable, a rumbling bass note that shook the loose dust from the damaged ceiling. Fixtures. He reached out blindly, grabbing the bent edge of a damaged diagnostic bed to steady his massive frame. The brilliant golden light in his eyes flickered weakly, slowly dimming back toward their natural glossy obsidian black. The oppressive heat radiating from his thick carapace began to cool rapidly, replaced by a sudden violent full-body shiver. The universe, Valkarn murmured, his heavy head drooping forward, the majestic sensory crests folded flat and lifeless against his skull, entirely devoid of their former electric energy. The universe is suddenly very heavy. Just sit down, man, Wyatt said gently. Just sit down and breathe. The king of the ascendancy collapsed heavily onto the diagnostic bed. The reinforced metal groaned in protest. under his immense weight, but, miraculously held together, he pulled, his thick knees tightly toward his chest, becoming a perfect ironic mirror image of Wyatt's suffering in the containment cell just an hour prior. Kyle scrambled desperately to synthesize a highly concentrated carbohydrate solution. The pale Visser's movements, frantic but deeply purposeful. Wyatt simply stood there watching the alien god suffer the incredibly mundane, universal agony of a massive caffeine crash. The paralyzing fear of galactic extinction was completely gone. There was only a profound, absurd realization settling deep into his tired bones. Humanity's greatest existential threat wasn't a sprawling armada of heavily armed plasma cruisers. It was an ATFT armored bug with a brand new crippling caffeine dependency. The crash lasted for 12 grueling hours. Wyatt was not shoved back into his freezing, featureless cell. Instead, he was confined to the royal antechamber of the Sovereign. It was a cavernous space of staggering alien opulence. The towering walls were constructed of perfectly polished black obsidian, softly illuminated by captured nebula gases, trapped forever in floating glass spheres. The floor was covered in a dense, biological moss that felt exactly like walking on a damp, supportive sponge. Air smelled of exotic resins and cold power. Wyatt sat quietly on a massive curved bench meant for a larger creature. He had been provided with a warm, damp cloth to carefully clean the dried blood from his face alongside a tall glass of purified water. He drank it very slowly, his chest still ucked sharply where the royal guard had mercilessly pinned him to the floor. It was a dull, throbbing reminder of his own fragile mortality. He waited. He honestly did not know if he was waiting for a shiny medal or an execution plasma blade. The sheer absurdity of the entire situation had settled into a numb, hollow feeling deep in his gut. He stared at his hands. He passively watched the faint, lingering tremor in his fingers. The bitter irony of the moment was absolutely not lost on him. He desperately needed a cup of coffee. The heavy obsidian doors hissed and slid apart. Wyatt stood up instantly, his tired muscles tensed in pure survival instinct. Veal slowly entered the room. The Sovereign moved with immense difficulty. The terrifying lightning, fast kinetic energy from the ruined medical bay was entirely gone. His massive steps were heavy, measured, and painfully deliberate. His thick exoskeleton looked strangely dull. It completely lacked the vibrant, iridescent sheen it previously possessed. Before, the sensory crests atop his angular head were significantly lowered, resting in a neutral, almost utterly defeated posture. He looked profoundly exhausted. He looked incredibly hungover. Directly behind him walked Kale, the pale medical synthesizer, tightly clutching a transparent data pad. Valkorn stopped a few feet away from Wyatt. The alien god looked down. The large compound eyes were completely black once again, entirely devoid of the manic, terrifying golden light. "My head," the Sovereign spoke softly. The translation implant conveyed a deep, vibrating ache that resonated in the human skull. It was a phantom echo of royal cranial pain. It feels as though a microscopic fission reactor is actively melting down directly behind my optical sensors. Valk resonated. "Yeah," Wyatt said, his voice quiet and entirely devoid of diplomatic protocol. That is the chemical withdrawal. It is a severe tension headache. The blood vessels inside your brain are violently dilating. It will pass eventually. Velkarn let out a long, slow exhalation. It sounded exactly like a massive transport tire steadily losing air pressure. He walked slowly over to a massive alcove built into the wall and carefully lowered his immense bulk onto a heavily padded resting platform. Very slowly the underlying metal groaned softly in protest. You humans willingly live with this? Velkarn asked, staring intensely at Wyatt. You purposefully subject your delicate biology to this brutal cycle of artificial cognitive ascension and punishing physical descent. Every single day, Wyatt replied. Simply, sometimes twice a day. It really depends on the daily workload. Velkarn shook his massive head slightly, visibly wincing at the mundane motion. Your entire species is completely mad. You are physically fragile, your lifespans are remarkably brief, and your physical forms are laughably weak. Yet, you actively consume raw biological weapons simply to fuel your tasks. You willingly endure physical agony just to maintain a baseline of productivity. Wyatt shrugged tiredly. We do what we have to do to survive. Sovereign, we do not have impenetrable armored carapaces. We do not have centuries of genetic mastery. We just have stubborn grit and coffee. A heavy silence stretched across the vast antechamber. The very soft ambient hum of the floating nebula lamps was the only sound in the room. Wyatt waited patiently for the final verdict. He waited for the Sovereign to officially declare humanity a highly dangerous, fundamentally unstable element that absolutely must be purged forever. The ascendancy relies entirely on cold calculation, Velkarn finally said, his deep voice cutting sharply through the stillness. We meticulously plan centuries in advance. We optimize. We calculate every single variable. We do not experience the manic chaotic thrust of chemical acceleration. We long ago deemed such things biologically inefficient. However, during my ascension, I entirely rewrote the complex orbital defense algorithms for this entire sector of space. I mathematically solved a genetic degradation flaw in the third worker caste that has severely plagued our top scientists for 3 generations. I experienced a profound level of unprecedented cognitive mental clarity. I also genuinely believed I could hear the colors of the visible spectrum, and I spent 20 standard minutes attempting to mathematically disprove the existence of sleep, Velkarn admitted. A strange low clicking sound emanated from his mandibles. He was expressing profound, genuine embarrassment. It definitely has some drawbacks, Wyatt offered diplomatically. Indeed, Valk said. He sat up, completely straight. The commanding aura of the true king slowly returned, heavy and undeniable, though visibly tempered by the lingering headache. The Terran delegation has previously presented its terms for a territorial treaty. We have thoroughly reviewed them and found them lacking. We are drafting a completely new treaty. We absolutely require your coffee. We will safely harness this cognitive acceleration without risking the cascade. We strictly require uncontested, exclusive access to your planetary agricultural yield of the bean. In direct exchange, the Ascendi will guarantee Terran sovereignty. We will provide full military protection to all core worlds. You are authorized Now to accept. The previous diplomats bored me. You. Smell of the vital catalyst. Wyatt. Swallowed hard, ignoring the sharp pain. I formally accept. He walked out completely exhausted. He just needed a coffee. Did you enjoy this? Deep dive into humanity's most absurd, highly caffeinated victory. If Wyatt's chaotic survival resonated with your cynical soul, smash that like button and share it with your favorite coffee addict. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more grounded, gritty sci-fi and HFY stories that explore the weird, wild, and utterly human side of the galaxy. Drop a comment below. How would you handle a tweaking alien god? See you next.